September 26, 1983. 14 minutes past midnight. A bunker outside Moscow. A screen turns red. One word in giant backlit letters. Launch. The computer said a nuclear war had just begun. The officer on duty had minutes, not hours, to decide whether it was true. He said no. If he had said yes, you would not exist. Tonight, we change his answer. In this timeline, he says yes, and stay to the end, because when you learn what actually set off that alarm, you will not believe how small it was. To understand how close we came, you have to understand the year. 1983 was the most dangerous year of the Cold War, and almost no one alive at the time knew it. In March, President Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union an evil empire, and 2 weeks later announced a plan for a missile shield in space. To the aging men in the Kremlin, that did not sound like defense. It sounded like a country preparing to strike first and survive the answer. Their leader, Yuri Andropov, was a former head of the KGB who genuinely believed Washington was planning a surprise attack. As KGB chief, he had launched Operation Ryan, the largest Soviet intelligence operation of the Cold War, hunting the world for signs that the first strike was coming. Then, on September 1st, a Soviet fighter shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, a civilian airliner that had strayed into Soviet airspace. 269 people died, including a sitting American congressman. Reagan called it a crime against humanity. Soviet air defenses went to a hair trigger. 25 days later, with the world still seething, came the night this story turns on. Now here is the rule that governs everything that follows. The Soviet nuclear posture leaned on a principle called launch on warning. Brutal and simple. If your satellites detect enemy missiles in the air, you do not wait for them to land. You launch your own immediately, so that your retaliation is already flying before the enemy destroys your command. The flight time from American silos to Soviet soil was less than half an hour. And in practice, on this night, the judgment that would travel up that chain, a report that could well be believed before any ground radar saw a thing, belonged to one officer at one desk, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov. By pure chance, he was the one man on that rotation trained as a civilian engineer. His colleagues, he said later, were professional soldiers taught to give and obey orders. They would have reported exactly what the machine told them. Just after midnight, Petrov sat at the command desk of Serpukhov 15, the bunker watching the Soviet early warning satellites, and the screen turned red. Launch. One Minuteman missile fired, the panel said, from Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. The siren howled. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. Then the system reported a second launch, a third, a fourth, a fifth. The display switched from launch to missile strike. 5 American missiles inbound. In our timeline, Petrov held his nerve. A real American first strike would not begin with 5 missiles. It would be an overwhelming wave, hundreds of warheads at once. The ground radars showed nothing. The satellite system was new, and he did not fully trust it. He admitted, years later, that the odds felt like 50-50. And still, with the siren screaming and 5 missiles on the board, he picked up the phone and reported a malfunction. A false alarm. But this is the last crossroads. So let us change one thing, and only one thing. On this night, Petrov trusts the computer. The first red word appears, and he does what a professional soldier would have done. He picks up the phone, and he reports a confirmed attack. Watch what happens, because it happens fast. As he speaks, the screen escalates behind his voice. 2, 3, 4, 5. Missile strike. His confirmation is already climbing the chain of command, and now the machine appears to be proving him right. To a leadership steeped in 2 years of Operation Ryan paranoia, this is not a glitch. This is the decapitation strike they have been dreading, the surprise blow meant to erase the Soviet command before it can answer. The clock in their minds starts at 25 minutes. They wake the men who control the arsenal, and here is the turn. Under launch on warning, there is no time to verify. That was always the point. So in this timeline, the order that doctrine demanded is given. Across the frozen plains of the Soviet Union, silo doors open. Intercontinental missiles rise into the night sky, answering an attack that was never launched. Not one American warhead was in the air. Not one. And now the false alarm creates a real one. As Soviet missiles climb, the early warning systems of the United States see something unmistakable. Hundreds of warheads, rising, arcing toward North America and Europe. The first warning was false. This one is real. To the watchman at NORAD, there is no ambiguity, no single confusing blip. This is an unprovoked Soviet first strike, and American doctrine demanded the same answer. Retaliation. In this timeline, before the sun rises, the great cities of the Northern Hemisphere are burning. Hundreds of millions dead in the first hours. The fires throw enough soot into the upper atmosphere to dim the sun for years. Nuclear winter, failed harvests, famine reaching into every corner of the planet. So what fired that first missile onto Petrov's screen? Nothing did. Investigators later found that the satellites had been fooled by a rare alignment of sunlight glancing off high-altitude clouds over North Dakota, a glare the system read as the flare of launching missiles. The flaw was later fixed by cross-checking against a geostationary satellite. In this timeline, that fix comes too late to matter. Civilization ends because of light bouncing off a cloud. A war fought with thousands of weapons, started by zero. That is the world we did not get. And the reason we did not get it is the part history almost forgot. What saved us was not a treaty. It was not technology. The technology is what failed. It was one man, staring at a machine that said the war had begun, deciding with no time and no certainty to trust himself instead. And Stanislav Petrov was not rewarded for it. His superiors did not want it known that their billion-ruble warning system had nearly started a war. He was reprimanded, officially, for failing to fill out the war diary during the crisis. He left the service the following year after a nervous breakdown. His story stayed buried until 1998, when his old commander's memoirs finally told it. His own country never decorated him. The first thanks came from strangers abroad, 2 decades later. He died in May of 2017 in a small apartment outside Moscow, and the world did not learn of his death for months. The man who quietly saved more lives than anyone in history, gone without a headline. And 1983 was not finished with us. 6 weeks after Petrov's night, NATO ran a nuclear release exercise called Able Archer 83. A war game so realistic that Soviet analysts once again wondered whether it was the real thing. The most dangerous year of the Cold War nearly ended the world twice in 2 months. So think about that September night one more time. Your parents, their parents, every fragile chain of chances that leads to you. In that other timeline, all of it cut, on a quiet autumn night, by light on a cloud. He said no, and because he said no, you exist to hear this. But here is what should keep you awake. Petrov was not the only one. More than once, the fate of the world has come down to a single human refusal. Beneath the waves, in the suffocating dark of a submarine cut off from all contact, with depth charges exploding against the hull, a captain stood ready to fire a nuclear torpedo, and one officer's consent was all that stood between that order and the end of everything. His name was Vasily Arkhipov, and his story is even closer to the edge than this one. Once again, the machines and the moment said fire, and once again, everything depended on one man saying no.